The Kabuki theater is one of the most thoroughly Japanese forms that you're ever going to see. It is done all over the world now, but it's recognizably Japanese. It's kind of like sumo wrestling, where people will kind of they know about it all over the place, but they also recognize this is a distinctly Japanese form. And Kabuki is one of these things that's just really, really beautiful. It was a it was much more of a performance-based art form rather than a literary-based art form. But it's gorgeous to watch. If you ever have a chance to see it, it's hard for me. I mean, it's hard to describe what it's like, but it's hard to describe it without actually seeing it. So let me see if I can give it a try, though. So first of all, it is heavily stylized performances and a lot of music and a lot of dance. Like I said, the literary stuff is there, but the literary stuff is almost secondary to the performance. This is not like, I mean, if we were going to study Kabuki plays the way people study Shakespeare, we would have to be watching them. You couldn't be studying Kabuki plays in like an English class or whatever, because the literary stuff is just not the point. The point is to see it done. So it's a very theatrical form. Oh, yes, very elaborate makeup. There's extremely recognizable makeup and very elaborate costumes also in Kabuki theater. It's a lot more physical and flamboyant than No. In fact, there's a whole lot of philosophical thoughts about where No ends and Kabuki begins. And in a lot of ways, the word Kabuki means to tilt. And so a lot of people believe that why it was called that is because people said this is kind of like No off kilter, No a little bit messed up, a little bit like different, a little bent. And that's a lot of what it looks like. It's some beautiful stuff. You can recognize some of the No elements in it, but they're very, very different. Kabuki is much more flamboyant. The actors in this time, at first, this is kind of an interesting thing. At first, Kabuki was done entirely by women. In fact, there's a group of women that kind of started this idea, created this idea of Kabuki theater, and it was very popular for a while. Many of these women were also prostitutes, and they performed in this kind of a red light district where prostitution was kind of like an allowed thing. And what happened is that a lot of the samurai went to see these plays, and they would also solicit these prostitutes. And so the shogun didn't like that. He thought that that was beneath the dignity of his samurai. And so rather than getting rid of the plays altogether, he just went ahead and said, okay, women are outlawed. Women are not allowed to be actors here, because he was trying to keep the prostitution down. And so the female roles in Kabuki would then start to get played by young men. And the prostitution continued. Only now it was prostituting young men. So a few years, probably about another 20 or 30 years later, young men were outlawed from being Kabuki actors. And there's a number of laws like this that went through to try to like codify and make it so that it was like you could watch these plays, but it wouldn't be beneath the dignity of the samurai that were watching it. Today, Kabuki is done exclusively by older men. And in fact, there were laws in place for a while, basically dictating how they had to dress and how they had to do their hair and basically it seems designed to make them unattractive. So whatever, it kind of makes me feel like maybe the problem wasn't the theater, but whatever, that's how it was. And today, still, Kabuki is mostly done by men. You have the Onagata, as I said in the previous video, which were male actors that were practiced at playing female roles, who are considered extremely big stars. Most actors in Kabuki were born to the profession. Today, that's not quite as much the case, but still a lot of actors are born into the profession. It's a traditional sort of thing. And they are very highly regarded. They have a lot of clout. They're very important. But in a way, they're also social outcasts. Because if you were a member of the theater, if you were part of this, that kind of meant you were in your own little world. For a while, the law was that they had to live near where the theaters were, which meant they had to live in this certain neighborhood and stuff like that. They weren't allowed to be able to move beyond their caste. And if I was an actor and fell in love with a woman and I wanted her to marry me, she had to really decide to make a big change in her life because it basically meant that her whole life was going to be revolving around the theater now. So even though they were very highly regarded, in a way, they were kind of social outcasts at the same time. It's very cool idea. But I mean, I contrast that with what happened in Elizabethan England, where actors were had a lot of people that loved them and thought they were great, but generally speaking, they were considered the scum of the earth. In this, they were not considered the scum of the earth. They're considered very, very important, but very much like isolated. Um, that again has changed a bit in modern day, but it's still kind of there. Now, the staging in the Kabuki plays grew out of the know and ended up kind of making its own thing after a while. First of all, the stage is a lot wider. A no stage tended to be very small, always had a pine tree in the back because it was representative of the Shinto shrine. The Kabuki kind of got rid of the pine tree and made the stage a lot wider. So the stage would cover up basically one side of the room, which is not how the no used to do it. It's a much wider stage. They also had a lot of innovations that they put in to kind of make the play a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more spectacular. One thing they did is they did elevator trapdoors that they would use to bring up scenery. Another thing is scenery. They had scenery. The no plays did not have scenery generally. Maybe they might have like a chair, but that's about it. They also would brought in curtains, which is something that the no didn't use. The stage would revolve on a turntable. There'd be like a kind of a turntable that they would be acting on, and it would revolve slowly for certain effects so that you could see things, so the audience could see things from different angles. The most important thing is the hanamichi. If you see right here, if I can use my annotator right there, right here, this thing, probably the wrong color to use for that. But anyway, this thing right here, this was called the hanamichi. The hanamichi is a walkway that extended into the audience, and the Kabuki theater stage would use this for dramatic entrances and exits. And a lot of the time, these entrances and exits would take a long time because you're establishing your character. You take your time to walk in a certain way, very stylized, and it was almost like this dance as they were walking to the stage, which me as a Westerner, the couple of Kabuki plays I've seen, I would watch this, but after a while, start looking at my watch and wondering what's taking so long. Get to the stage so we can actually start the play. But that was the point of it. It was part of the performance was to establish here is this character and here how they see who they are as they're walking on the hanamichi to the stage. Yes, the me. This is a very stylized part of Kabuki theater. It's still a very big important thing. The me basically is a moment of great emotion or great climactic feeling. The actor will strike a pose on their face and on their body, and they will hold it for usually 4 or 5 seconds, just holding that pose. And then they might move again and do something else and strike another pose if you're still in this dramatic moment. Now, it's almost like they're posing for pictures and they're saying, okay, you want a picture of this important part, take that picture. Except, of course, cameras hadn't been invented yet. So it's really a beautiful thing today, but it's very performative. And it feels like, again, as a Westerner, I'm looking at my watch wondering, okay, why has he stopped moving? Has this frozen? Is this thing frozen? What's going on? But that's how it worked. The me was a very important part of Kabuki theater. Now, something connected with Kabuki, so I'm going to kind of teach them together, is the Bunraku, which is basically a puppet theater. Now, when I say a puppet theater, a lot of times my students will think, oh, okay, so this is like for kids. This is like a little theater box where they've got little puppets and stuff like that, and somehow this is like children. Wrong. The Bunraku is different than what you're thinking of as far as puppet theater. It is puppets in the sense that they have, fake dolls, basically, that they will manipulate. But it is considered very important. Very important. It's considered like a theatrical form. This is the fourth theatrical form I'm talking about. So it's on the level with No and Kyogen and Kabuki. So the first thing to understand is that these puppets are extremely intricate. Some of them are 4 feet long, or 4 feet tall rather, or longer than that. Um, Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're smaller, but they're still very intricate in the sense of being able to move eyebrows and eyes and stuff like this. It's very intricate construction. And Bunraku is considered just as legitimate, as I said, as any other kind of theater. People would go to see these puppet plays, and they were expected to have just as much emotion getting into them as they would if they were seeing live action people, which is very different than our expectations as Westerners, I think. Oh, the stages of Bunraku stages are big. You expect, since we're dealing with puppets, even 4 foot tall puppets, that the stages would be smaller, but they're not. They're bigger. Sometimes they were larger than the Kabuki stages. And like the Kabuki stages, they were very innovative. They had the same kind of elevator traps and turntable-y things and stuff like that. They had all sorts of things like this with scenery. Even though it was puppets, they were still considered to be a piece of theater, just like the Kabuki or the No. Often, Bunraku plays were then made into Kabuki plays, and Kabuki plays were made into Bunraku plays. And since, like I said, they came about right around the same time, Kabuki was probably a bit earlier, but as a result, though, they ended up kind of going down history together. And a lot of the greatest Bunraku plays also are Kabuki plays, and vice versa. A lot of the best Kabuki plays also are Bunraku. And so a lot of times, if you're trying to find information about a play on Wikipedia or whatever, you need to specify whether you're looking at the Kabuki play or the Bunraku play, because the story would be the same, but it would be obviously very different, having people versus puppets. So the puppeteers of Bunraku were very highly trained. This isn't something you just kind of woke up and decided, I'm going to learn how to do puppetry. A Bunraku puppet, especially the intricate ones, were controlled by 3 different puppeteers. You'd have 3 people working one puppet. One would work on the feet, another one would work on the left hand, and then the third one would work on the right hand and the head. Now, here's something kind of cool, though. You had to apprentice from one to the next of that one. An actor needed to spend 10 years as a foot puppet, just working the feet. And then after 10 years, if you were still good enough, you would graduate to working on that left hand. Only then were you trusted to work the right hand and the head. So Bunraku puppeteers, they did not mess around. They wanted to make sure you really knew what you were doing and were dedicated to your craft. And as a result, Bunraku puppeteers, this tends to be what they did. And like Kabuki, it tended to go in families. You would learn very early, and by the time you were old enough to be able to be working the head, you knew very much what was going on in all of the different plays that you were working on. There's one writer I want you to know about that wrote both Kabuki and Bunraku. This guy's name is Chikamatsu Monzaemon. He is often called the Japanese Shakespeare, but it would be just as legitimate to refer to Shakespeare as the English Chikamatsu, because Chikamatsu was extremely important and extremely prolific. He wrote a lot. Now, Kabuki plays, as I said, they tended to be a lot more like bullet points, and then the performance would fill in the background. So it wasn't like as long, maybe, as a lot of Shakespeare plays. But Chikamatsu wrote a lot of them. He wrote almost 100 plays that we still have. And so there's probably a lot of other ones that got lost between Bunraku and Kabuki plays. So he wrote a lot of plays. Many of them were about lovers that committed suicide at the end. This actually became like a set kind of play that he popularized. In fact, for a while, they were so popular that they were outlawed. The Japanese government outlawed them because there were too many people that were copycatting, too many young lovers that were killing themselves based on plays that Chikamatsu had written. They are not illegal anymore, but that shows you some of the power of this writer. They weren't all lover suicide plays, by the way. Some of them were history plays Some of them were plays about Japanese history, wars, and things like this. Some really amazing stuff. The play that he wrote, though, that I want you to know about is based on a real event. A lot of his plays about the lovers' suicides were based on real events that really happened, like right in the area when he was writing in the red light district of Tokyo, and also in the among the people that were writing, and a lot of them knew the people there that he was writing about. And that was certainly the case for this one. This play, most dramatization, real events. This play is called The Love Suicides of Sonozaki. So the first thing to know about The Love Suicides of Sonozaki is that the title kind of gives away what's about to happen. But it was ripped from the headlines, and so there was a lot of interest in this story. Our main character is a guy named Tokube. Forgive me, I'm probably going to mispronounce a lot of these names. I'm going to do the best I can. But Tokube is in love with a woman named Ohatsu. And at the very beginning of the first scene, he comes to her house, and she's basically a courtesan. And she's like, why have I not seen you for a long time? And he tells her the basic story about why he's been busy. He is either an oil merchant or a soy merchant. It's hard to tell exactly from the translation, but anyway, he's a merchant with a firm, and his boss, who is also his uncle, is trying to set him up with his niece from the niece of his wife. And he's been trying to set this up, and Tokobai has been trying to be polite because it is, after all, his boss, but he's been basically telling him, I'm not interested in that, that's not something I want to do. The boss doesn't really take no for an answer very much, and so instead he just kind of is making it happen anyway and setting it up, and there's a whole dowry situation until eventually Tokobai has to basically just be very blunt and say, I do not want her, I am in love with Ohatsu. And so the guy, his uncle, is very upset about this, fires him, and tells him, you need to go and get the dowry back and bring it back to me. Even though Tokobai had nothing to do with this dowry, but he basically is required to do this or else he'll be shamed. So he's telling this whole story to Ohatsu, by the way, and he basically went over there, got the dowry for this woman, and he had a couple of days though before he needed to bring it back to his boss. And in the meantime, a friend of his, Koheiji, came up to him and said, I am in great big trouble, Tokobai. I need a certain amount of money in order to pay some debts, and I'm in trouble. I need him right away. And Tokobai, because he's a good-hearted guy, and because he's got a couple of days still before he has to pay back the money for the dowry, he goes ahead and gives that money to his friend Kohojai. And Kohojai goes away with it, and then he continues his story with Ohatsu and says, and now it's been a few days, and so I really don't know what Kohojai's deal is. And then suddenly Kohojai shows up and says, oh, there you are, good. I need that money back that I loaned you. And Kohojai basically says, what money? What money are you even talking about? And he says, the money I loaned you. I have this IOU that you gave me. He says, that is an IOU that is fake. That is not even real. I don't believe that you ever owed me any, you ever gave me any money at all. So Kohojai basically is cheating him. Tokobai is obviously very upset about this. He gets in a fight with him. He gets beat up pretty badly because he's got a bunch of friends on his side, and he kind of laughs at him and leaves. And so Tokobai is basically realizing that at this point, he has been, not only he's been beat up and hurt, but also he now has been thoroughly swindled, has lost this money that he needs to, and now he has no choice but to marry the woman that he was set up with because he can't replace the dowry. Also, though, he is incredibly shamed. All of these things are going to keep him from being able to be with Ohatsu. And that's how the first act ends. The second act, he goes to Ohatsu and tells her about this whole situation and this whole story, and she's very upset about it, and they both kind of decide that they want to find some way out of this. And then in the middle of this, Koheiji comes to see Ohatsu. It turns out that he's excited about Ohatsu himself, which may have been one reason why he's doing this. Tokobai hides beneath Ohatsu's robe, which I'm going to try to do like this. So, well, good enough. So that he comes in and he basically propositions Ohatsu and very sneeringly basically says that he believes Tokobai is going to be shamed and probably exiled or executed, and then you will be mine. And she is not happy about this, but Kohajai is a great big jerk, and so he doesn't seem to care what she wants. He's going to make her his. And again, sneeringly laughing, and goes away. And these two continue to communicate underneath the robe, just like the narrator says what they're saying, like as they're communicating with their feet, basically. And they basically decide that they are going to both commit suicide and kill themselves rather than have him be shamed and have her be forced to marry this other guy. And at the end of the second act, they basically sneak out of the house that she lives in from the servant that's guarding them, and that's the end of the second act. The third act, they dress in these special white death clothes, basically, and there's a long amount of poetry showing, their situation and all this sort of thing. They go to a special place in the woods. There is a tree. I should have a tree. Do I have a tree? This will work for our tree. Alright, and they tie themselves to this tree, and then Tokabai cuts Ohatsu's throat, and then cuts his own throat. And that's the end of the play, except for a guy that comes out and basically says, their love was so true and wonderful, they will surely attain to Buddhahood. And that's the end of the play. And like I said, this was still is a very popular play, and it ended up being almost a whole genre of love-suicide plays. So I don't know about you, but when I think of a play that has people in love that commit suicide at the end, I think of Romeo and Juliet. That's the play that I think of. So for your discussion question today, what I want you to do is tell me, how is this play similar to Romeo and Juliet? And how is it different from Romeo and Juliet? So one similarity and one difference. Go ahead and answer that in the discussion question below, and then go on to the next one after that.